In 2017, engineers in New York Harbor did something that sounds almost impossible. They lifted a 1,675-foot steel arch bridge in place 64 feet into the air, while cars kept driving over it. They didn't do it for beauty. They didn't do it for traffic. They did it because a bridge built in 1931 declared the tallest battleships of its era had become too short for a container ship that didn't exist yet when the bridge was designed. Obvious explanation for why ports struggle to grow is money. Dig deeper, buy more land, build more cranes. That's the story most people believe. It's not wrong. It's just the smallest part of the truth, because underneath almost every port on Earth is a set of physical limits that no amount of money can simply dissolve. Some of them are written into the seabed. Some of them are written into the tides. Some of them were fixed in concrete 100 years before anyone had heard the word container. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the largest ships on the planet are quietly rerouting themselves around cities that can no longer serve them. Why a canal on the other side of the world can decide whether your city's port survives. And why just make it bigger is one of the most expensive lies in global trade. Start with the explanation. Everyone reaches for first. It's about land. A port needs space, and space runs out. Look at a map of Manhattan or Hong Kong or Singapore, and you'll see solid walls of city pressed right up against the water. Surely that's the whole story. It's true as far as it goes. Land does run out, and reclaiming more of it is brutally expensive. China's Yangshan port, built on a chain of islands off Shanghai, exists because the mainland coast near the city was too shallow and too crowded to hold a modern terminal. So they built an entirely new island, connected by a 32-kilometer bridge. That's what it costs to manufacture space when nature and the city won't give you any. But land isn't the limit for most ports. Rotterdam has plenty of land left in its Maasvlakte extension. Houston has land for miles along its ship channel. If land were the real bottleneck, those ports could simply keep pouring concrete forever. They can't, which means something else is doing the limiting. The second explanation people reach for is money. Ports are owned by cities, states, or private companies, and infrastructure is expensive. So surely it's a budget problem. Give a port enough money, and it can dredge deeper, build longer berths. Buy bigger cranes. Money matters enormously here. Dredging a shipping channel can run into the billions, and raising a single bridge, as you'll see, cost over $1.5 billion. But money solves problems that are fixable in principle. It doesn't solve problems that are fixed by geology, geometry, or an international treaty signed decades ago. You can't outspend a rock formation. You can't buy your way past a tide that comes twice a day whether you paid for it or not. The third explanation is technology. Bigger cranes, smarter software, automated terminals. All real, all helpful. None of it changes the depth of the water a ship is floating in, or the height of a bridge a ship has to pass under, or the width of a canal a ship has to fit through on its way to you. Technology can make a port more efficient. It cannot make the ocean deeper. So if it's not land, and it's not money, and it's not technology, what's actually holding these ports in place? Here's the first layer, and it starts with a number almost nobody thinks about. Draft. Draft is simply how far a ship sinks below the waterline. The distance from the surface of the water down to the very bottom of the hull. A modern ultra-large container ship, fully loaded, can draw over 50 feet of water. That's a 5-story building's worth of steel hanging beneath the surface, and every inch of it needs open water beneath it, or the ship runs aground. Think of it like trying to park a moving truck in a garage built for a compact car. It doesn't matter how good the truck's engine is, or how much money the trucking company has. If the garage ceiling, or in this case, the seafloor is too close, the truck does not fit. Full stop. This is why ports along the U.S. East Coast spent the last decade in what shipping analysts openly called a race to the bottom, a race to dig deeper, not build higher. A 39-foot channel handles a typical Panama ship, but ships carrying more than 5,000 containers need at least 42 feet, and ships above 10,000 containers need roughly 50 feet of depth. One by one, ports had to dredge to that 50-foot mark just to stay in the game. Miami got there in 2014, New York in 2016, Charleston by 2022, and Houston only reached 46.5 feet as recently as 2025. But dredging isn't a one-time fix. and that's the second layer. You might assume that once a channel is dug deep enough, it stays that way. It doesn't. The deeper you dredge a channel, the calmer the water becomes at the bottom of it. And calm water is exactly where drifting sediment likes to settle. Dig a hole in a riverbed, and the river spends the rest of its existence quietly trying to fill it back in. Picture a sandcastle moat at the beach. You dig it deeper, and for a moment it holds water beautifully. But the incoming tide doesn't just fill the moat, it carries sand with it. And within hours, your careful trench is half its original depth again. A shipping channel is that moat, except the tide comes twice a day, forever. And the sandcastle is a multi-billion-dollar piece of national infrastructure. Houston's ship channel needs continuous dredging throughout the year just to hold its depth, even in years when no expansion is happening at all. Depth, once one has to be defended constantly, it is never simply kept. So depth is a battle you fight forever. But even a port that wins that battle can be beaten by something above the water instead of below it. And this is the layer almost nobody sees coming. In 1931, engineers built the Bayonne Bridge across the Van Kuil, the narrow strait linking Newark Bay to New York Harbor, at 151 feet above the water. It was tall enough to clear the largest U.S. Navy ships of its time, and for 80 years. That was more clearance than anyone could imagine needing. Then the Panama Canal expanded. A new generation of ships, wider, longer, and dramatically taller, started crossing the Pacific and heading for the East Coast. And suddenly a bridge that had comfortably cleared warships for 8 decades was forcing modern container ships to load extra ballast water just to sit lower and squeeze underneath, or to wait for low tide, or to fold down their own antennas to shave off a few feet. Imagine spending your entire career building taller and taller buildings, only to discover that the doorway to your office hasn't grown since the year you were born. That's what the ports of Newark, Elizabeth, and Staten Island were facing. The fix, ultimately, was a $1.7 billion project to raise the bridge's roadway by roughly 64 feet, not replace the bridge, not tunnel underneath it, but physically lift an existing 1,675-foot steel arch into the air while keeping it open to traffic the entire time. That's the real hidden shape of making a port bigger. It's rarely about the port itself. It's about every fixed structure, canals, bridges, locks, even the curvature of a river that a ship has to pass through to reach it. A port can dredge its own berths to 60 feet, and it will still be irrelevant to the largest ships on Earth. If a 151-foot bridge sits in the only channel leading to it, and that leads to the final, quietest layer of all, geography itself can simply say no. Some straits are too narrow to widen without demolishing a city. Some seabeds are solid rock, where dredging isn't excavation, it's blasting, at a cost and an environmental risk that can shut a project down entirely. Some rivers shift course, silt up, or flood in ways engineers can slow but never fully stop. Money can move sand. It struggles to move mountains. You can see this same constraint operating thousands of miles away from any American port. In the Suez Canal, the world's biggest crude oil tankers, the ones that can carry 2 million barrels in a single hull, don't cross the Suez fully loaded. They can't. The canal's own draft limits force these ships to transit with less cargo than they're built to carry. So they arrive partially empty, not because the shipping company chose caution, but because the canal itself has drawn a hard line. The ship physically cannot cross while full. A single fixed channel, thousands of miles from the ship's origin or its destination, is quietly setting the maximum size of a cargo. Delivery before the voyage even begins. Notice what's happening across every one of these layers. A ship's draft is fixed by physics. A channel's depth is fixed by an endless, expensive fight against sediment. A bridge's clearance is fixed by a decision someone made using the tallest ship they could imagine, decades before your ship was ever designed, and a strait's width is fixed by continents that were never consulted about container shipping at all. None of these limits care about each other. A port can conquer 3 of them and still be stopped cold by the 4th. Once you see draft, tides, bridges, and geology as the real gatekeepers, a strange pattern starts showing up everywhere. In the world of shipping, a pattern that explains behavior that otherwise looks bizarre. It explains why some of the largest ships in the world now deliberately avoid ports that are, on paper, huge, successful, and world famous. A terminal with plenty of land and plenty of money can still be functionally too small if the water in front of it, or the bridge above the channel leading to it, hasn't changed since. The ship that built it was Queen of the Sea. It explains the sudden wave of megaship proofing. Projects across the world in the last 15 years, dredging in Savannah, dredging in Mobile, the Bayonne Bridge, lift in New York. The Panama Canal's own multi-billion-dollar expansion of its locks. These weren't upgrades chosen for prestige. Ports without them faced a real, quantifiable risk of losing cargo permanently to rivals down the coast that could clear the new generation of ships. Depth and clearance had become a competitive weapon, and falling behind meant losing business. You might never get back, and it explains something closer to your own life than you might expect. Every time a ship gets rerouted because it's a few feet too deep or a few feet too tall for a port along its usual route, that detour adds time, fuel, and cost to a supply chain that eventually ends at a shelf near you. A container that could have moved on one giant efficient ship now has to move on to smaller, less efficient ones, or travel an extra few hundred miles to reach a port that can actually take it. None of that shows up on the receipt. It shows up quietly, folded into the price. Long before the product ever reaches a store, think about the last time a package took longer to arrive than the estimate promised. With no explanation given anywhere in the tracking history, you'll never see held up by a 1931 bridge or rerouted around a canal built before your grandparents were born on any shipping label. But somewhere behind that delay, a physical limit almost nobody learns about in school may have just made a decision for you. The width of a 200-year-old strait, or the height of a bridge built for a navy that no longer exists in that form, can nudge the price and the timing of the goods in your home. The ocean doesn't know about your delivery date. The bridge doesn't know it's obsolete. But both of them are quietly setting prices and schedules you live with, without ever announcing their names. Here's the detail that reframes everything. You just learned the Bayonne Bridge wasn't lifted because engineers found a clever new way to solve an old problem forever. It was lifted because 215 feet of clearance is enough for today's ships, not tomorrow's. Somewhere, a naval architect is already sketching a hull that will one day make even that new height look small, the same way 151 feet once looked more than sufficient for 80 years. That's the pattern. Underneath almost every fixed structure on Earth, not a solved problem, but a truce with the present, waiting to expire. Every port, every canal, every bridge over water is a bet about how big things will get, and eventually, every bet like that gets called. If you want to keep pulling on threads like this, the hidden physical rules running the systems you rely on every day and never think about, this is exactly the kind of thing we go looking for every week. Stick around, and the next time you glance at a bridge, a shoreline, or a ship on the horizon, you'll wonder what invisible number is quietly deciding its fate too.